I remember my grandfather always being this happy-go-lucky, jovial, smiling guy, especially when his grandkids were around, right? Well, at that moment, I got a very different look. And that's when he looked at me and he said, Jodi, he said, someday, I think he was almost pleading with me, but someday you will understand that this isn't about selling machines. This is about changing people's lives. This is about helping them know that they can do something and be successful at something. And we're not successful until every single person that buys a Vitamix machine is successful. And you're right. I never forgot that. So I kind of brought that back with me too. It's all these little pieces that become a part of who you are.
Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the true pleasure of speaking with Jodi Berg. Jodi recently retired as the fourth generation president and CEO of Vitamix, having joined the family business in 1997 with the directive to lead the company's overseas expansion, later serving as director of international household and commercial divisions, and then ultimately as executive vice president in 2007, president in 2009, and CEO in 2011. Under her leadership, Jodi built on the over 100-year history and legacy of her family's business. Founded in 1921 and headquartered in Olmsted Township in the greater Cleveland area, to grow the iconic and beloved brand to what it is today, with expanded distribution to over 130 countries and over 400% organic growth during her tenure. As many are familiar with, Vitamix manufactures high-performance blending equipment for home and commercial use, with millions of consumers around the world who use Vitamix products to help achieve their personal health and culinary goals. The company's commercial customer list reads like a who's who of major restaurant chains, and gourmet chefs regard their Vitamix machines in the same light and importance as they regard their own knives. The company has an incredible history of innovation and invention, and developed the first true commercial blender in the early 1990s, which ignited the smoothie movement and has been named the best-in-class overall beverage blender for decades by readers of Food Service Equipment and Supplies magazine. As you'll hear in our conversation, Jodi developed a highly intentional approach to leadership, centered on purpose and employee engagement, which she formalized, researched, and earned a PhD in management from Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School of Management, and ultimately leveraged to transform the organizational structure of Vitamix and its corporate vision, mission, and culture. This was such a fun and unforgettable conversation. We actually got into such depth and breadth here that I'm breaking the episode into two parts that will cover Vitamix and leadership across growing up in the family business and the familial lessons passed on, the evolution of Vitamix over the generations and the corresponding ingredients required to thrive for over a century, balancing family legacy with innovation, lessons learned in hospitality and working at the Ritz-Carlton, many personal stories and historical anecdotes about Vitamix that shape Jodi's understanding of purpose and how it drives engagement and fulfillment in both personal and professional contexts, synthesizing Jodi's learnings into her upcoming book, why Vitamix is headquartered in Cleveland, helping people find their superpowers, and a whole lot more. Jodi is an incredibly thoughtful teacher and operator, and this really felt like a masterclass in all things business, leadership, and purpose. So please enjoy this wonderful discussion with Jodi Berg. Lay of the Land is brought to you and is proudly sponsored by Roundstone Insurance. Headquartered in Rocky River, Ohio, Roundstone shares Lay of the Land's same passion for bold ideas and lasting impact from our community's entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. Since 2005, Roundstone has pioneered a self-funded captive health insurance model that delivers robust savings for small and medium-sized businesses. They are part of the solution to rising healthcare costs, helping employers offer affordable, high-quality care while driving job creation and economic growth throughout Northeast Ohio. Like many of the voices featured on Lay of the Land, including Roundstone's founder and CEO Mike Schroeder, Roundstone believes entrepreneurship, innovation, and community to be the cornerstones of progress. To learn more about how Roundstone is transforming employee health benefits by empowering employers to save thousands in per employee per year healthcare costs, please visit roundstoneinsurance.com. Roundstone Insurance, built for entrepreneurs, backed by innovation, committed to Cleveland. So I don't normally have a prop, but I did think it made sense to, to kick us off with, I have a Vitamix and I generated a smoothie. And so what was interesting was to learn that wasn't necessarily always the desired path for you to work in the family business when you were growing up, that there was this exploration of fields and of other businesses. And so I kind of wanted to start there, knowing you ultimately did return to the family business, just how your interests and curiosities deviated from Vitamix growing up, and what it was like growing up within the family business, and what you found yourself drawn to professionally, given, all those influences.
Okay,
And
well,
now I'm going to enjoy this smoothie.
Well, what's in your smoothie? First, we got to start with that. Like, what are you drinking?
We got to start. It's berries, some spinach and a banana, and some water.
Just imagine, you can't like just mush something like that together. You have to
can't.
break it down on a molecular level and just bring all those flavors together, and it just tastes amazing. That's kind of what differentiates the Vitamix from anything else.
It's real innovation. I mean, and there's a cult like following, and we'll get into all of that.
Yeah. Okay, no, so I've already forgotten the question that you asked me. You wanted me to just kind of go back and say, how did I end up in Vitamix, and how did I come back to Vitamix?
Right. Well, I was kind of interested in the deviation from Vitamix, because it sounded like perhaps you didn't even want to be in Vitamix necessarily.
So
originally.
Vitamix is, although it's 100 years old, it has not been particularly large for most of its existence. It was actually quite small. And it was started by my great-grandfather in 1921. And by the time my dad was around, and his grandfather lived right next to Vitamix, and he was involved in Vitamix when he was a teenager, helping out, working. So he didn't really want anything to do with Vitamix. So he went out and did his own thing and was an entrepreneur, and moved my family, or his family, moved us to Erie, Pennsylvania. So I was born in upstate New York, lived there for the first 3 years of my life. And then I moved to Erie, Pennsylvania with my family. The majority of my life was there. And it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that I came back to Cleveland, because my father had decided at that point they wanted to focus on engineering new products. Up until then, Vitamix wasn't really, in the beginning, it wasn't our invention. We didn't invent the blender. My great-grandfather started by selling kitchen gadgets, starting with a can opener. And from the can opener, then potato peelers and other things, and just really focusing on tools that you could use to eat healthier. So he went down that path. But when my father was out doing his own thing, they asked him, would you come back and bring your engineering skills, because that was his degree and his experience, to help us design like the next level of Vitamix. So the family was still living with him at the time. We moved to Cleveland. I took a summer job answering telephones and that type of thing at Vitamix, and that was really my first exposure to it. But because anyone who's in family business often has this experience. We are, at this point, I'm fourth generation. So family reunions, my grandparents lived in this little house that's still there. We turned it into a museum, a family museum.
Wow.
And if you get a chance to see it, we took the house that my grandfather built. He's not a carpenter. So yeah, we did a lot of work to shore it up. It wasn't particularly safe to live in at that point, 70, 80 years later, but we shored it up and we turned it into a museum, and we picked the 1950s and we froze the house into that period of time. So when you walk through, you can almost feel my grandparents living there and then raising their kids. So as a family business, we'd come back for family reunions, and my grandparents had 6 kids. And how many grandkids do they have? A lot, something like 30 plus grandkids.
Wow. And
we'd come for family reunions into this little log cabin, and between the kids and the dogs and everyone just plowing into this little cabin, the generation above us would always talk business and politics and religion. So most of us in my generation grew up saying, we don't want anything to do with this family business, because the conversations were not always sunshine and roses, right? Sometimes there's a lot of of energy and passion around what they were talking about.
Business, politics, and religion.
Exactly. So I grew up thinking there's no way I would want anything to do with this family business. And it was okay. We didn't live in Ohio anyways. Well, then we moved to Ohio. And I spent one summer working there. And I think I worked there my senior year of high school. But I was going to go off and do my own thing. And my dad was a serial entrepreneur up until the point that he came back to head up engineering with his brother at Vitamix. And so I took one of those assessments in school, and it said I should be a mechanical engineer. And I'm thinking, well, my dad was. The assessment says I should be. Clearly, everyone else knows more than I do. I should be an engineer. So I went off to school to be an engineer. And after a year, I was absolutely miserable. I hated physics. I can do it. I just hated it. Calculus. Blah. Like, ugh. It just gives me hives thinking about it to this day. I'm much more of a people person. So after a year, I just had one of those breakdown one-on-one conversations with my mom. And she says, then change, do something else. And it was one of those first times where I guess I'm a slow learner, but I'm thinking, wait, I have that option? Like, but the assessment said I should do this. Like, don't they know what I'm supposed to do? So I switched. I changed actually universities, but I changed degrees in business. And I don't know how I came across the hospitality management program at Bowling Green, but I fell in love. I'm like, somebody would actually pay me to create experiences for people. They would pay me to make them happy. Like, I would get paid to make something happen that would give people a memory. That just lit me up from the inside out. And so I got my degree and I got into hospitality management following that dream. So that's when I first landed in hospitality, and nothing to do with wanting to be a part of the business. That came a little bit later.
Well, I wanted to pull on the hospitality thread. Ritz-Carlton has kind of its own illustrious and lore around being, I think, best in class at what it does. And so I wanted to ask what you learned from Ritz-Carlton about brand, hospitality, customers, and just what you took with you from that experience and how you ended up at Ritz-Carlton in the first place.
So, how I ended up there is actually a kind of funny story. So I worked for Marriott for a while, and then I went back and got my MBA, and I couldn't afford an MBA. I hadn't worked long enough. I had no money to my name. So being entrepreneurial like my dad, I thought, well, how can I get a degree and use the fact that I love hospitality and not be in debt when I'm done? So I just associated myself with all these different associations that had to do with hospitality management, where the directors of these different programs would be coming to their annual meetings. And I just met all the directors, and finally found a school that I liked the program, and they brought me on as a teaching assistant. And so they paid for my college, and they gave me enough of a stipend that as long as I had a roommate, I could pay for housing and food. And I was going to get through my MBA without any debt. So it's going to work out great. It was all the way out in the state of Washington. So I packed up my car and all the way to the top. I literally I had all these bags and boxes and suitcases, and I brought them out to the driveway. And my dad said, I'll pack your car for you. And I said, okay, I'll help you. He said, no. It's best if you just go inside. So I went inside to visit with my mom. My dad packed, he packed everything in my car. He comes in, he's like, yep, you're ready to go. I walk out, all of my luggage, my boxes, my bags, everything is empty, but it's all in my car. The only way he fit it in my car is literally taking everything out and sticking it in the wheel wells and in the seats and, tucking it in all these different places. It saved enough room on the passenger side for my mom to sit, and she could crochet the entire way out there, and then I could drive. And my mom and I took off for Washington State, and I got to my apartment. I know this is not what this is all about. You can cut all this if you want to, but I got to my apartment.
No, I love
and
it.
My room is on the second floor, and it was locked because I got there on a Sunday. So I just went around and I just knocked on neighbors' doors to see if there was anyone tall. And there was this nice, tall, young man. His name was David. We became good friends. And I said, would you mind standing on top of my car and lifting me up? Because there's one of the windows in my apartment looks like it's a little open. And I think I can pull the window open and climb into my apartment if I stand on your shoulders.
Oh
So
my goodness.
I did it. I got into my apartment. But I digress. So I get through my MBA, and I had taken a class in quality and fell in love with quality. Now I have two passions. I love hospitality management, and
Yep.
I love the concept of quality, but I only took one course. My focus was on multi-unit management and restaurants and running hospitality. This was the one at that time exception, because hospitality and quality hadn't come together yet. So I come back to Cleveland, and I decide, well, for a while, until I figure out how to do this quality thing, I'll work at Vitamix, because my uncle, who was running it at the time, was putting in a quality program relatively early on for most companies. But that goes into why our quality is the way it is today, was this
Yeah.
foundation of my uncle putting in a quality program. So I worked for him for 1 year and went into every single department and got a chance to understand what they do and how they do it and how it fits with the other departments and how we can improve our quality. But during that time, the Ritz-Carlton won the Malcolm Baldrige Award. So Emily Yen was the director of quality at the time for the Cleveland property. And I got a chance to go down and hear her speak in the beautiful Ritz-Carlton ballroom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And afterwards, I mean, it was packed. So after the words, there was probably 30 or 40 people that wanted to talk to her about this. Well, I want to talk to her because, oh my gosh, I love hospitality and I love quality. And like these two are coming together. That's like peanut butter and jelly. That's like what's the commercial about the Reese's cup, right?
Yeah.
The chocolate and
It's
peanut
like
butter
a celestial alignment
it's
of bodies.
perfect. Like, this is me. So I stood in line. I'm so nervous. Keep in mind, I'm still young. I'm in my 20s. And I get to the front of the line. It's finally my turn. And I babble out and I say, Emily Yen, it's nice to meet you. My name is Jodi Barnard. I want your job. So, I'm sorry. I kind of do. But when you get promoted, and I was just trying to salvage the
That's amazing.
awkwardness of what I had just done. And she took it in good spirits and started mentoring me in quality. And I learned everything about her job. So when she did get promoted, I had to go through the interview process, but I was like a shoo-in for her job. And that's how I got my job at the Ritz as the director of quality. And you're right, it's so special. The Ritz-Carlton, in fact, to this day, I may miss a few words, but I still have the credo in my head of what the Ritz-Carlton was all about, and their motto of ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen, and how you can just instill well-being in people. You can create an emotion that impacts people in a way that's so much deeper than what they've heard or what they've seen, but that experience of how they feel. And I never forgot that. While I was at the Ritz, I didn't realize that I had this skill set, but apparently I'm relatively good at public speaking. And I didn't know that at the time. But the vice president of the Ritz was traveling around the world with quite a schedule, talking about the Ritz-Carlton quality and the Malcolm Baldrige Award and how that came together. And as the director of quality, I had to speak to different organizations and groups about what the Ritz-Carlton was. Well, he heard me speak at one point, and he asked me if I wouldn't mind being a stand-in for him. So the next thing I know, I'm flying to Singapore, I'm flying to Europe, I'm like all over the United States doing these presentations on Ritz-Carlton and Malcolm Baldrige Award.
Wow.
But what it triggered when I started traveling internationally was I realized I have a third passion. I love this world. I love different cultures. I love different countries. I love what makes different people click because of where they're from. We talk about you being from New York, and we talk about the Midwest, and we act different. I have a dear friend from New York, and I'm giving him a hard time all the time. I'm like, no, dude, just chill. Like, it's okay. Yes, you can say hi. It's just a different way of how our upbringing happens. So then I became fascinated with international, and that was my Ritz-Carlton experience.
So you have 3 loves now, right?
Yes.
Quality and hospitality and international. And it seems that does lay the foundation for, your foray back to Vitamix ultimately.
It actually did. So I'm working my way at the Ritz-Carlton as a director of quality. And the essence of quality is to improve things at the root cause, right? You want to get to the bottom of problems, but it's also to make things more efficient, more effective, and more sustainable. So I took those last three very seriously, and it got to a point where I went to my general manager and I said, I am in the process of working myself out of a job. I said, within about 6 months, you're not going to need me here anymore. You might need a part-time person, you can need a lower level person, but you're not going to need a director of quality of this particular property. I said, so I just want to give you a heads up. He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. We shall see. So at that same time that was happening, Vitamix, the third generation, which would be my father's generation, they were going through quite a bit of a shakeup, if you will, which happens. You've got 6 of them, and all of them are married. So you've got the spouses thing, right? So they're going through a shakeup, and my uncle decides that he's not sure he sees Vitamix and family being able to stay together. That maybe it's time to sell the company, because I don't think family can run this company going forward. Until he said that, my brother, who was working at Vitamix at the time, and I had a really strong reaction to, wait, it's supposed to always be in the family. It never occurred to us that it maybe someday wouldn't be in the family. And so my brother went out and found a book written by Ernesto Poza, which a lot of people in Cleveland will know from days gone by. He's been in Arizona for a long time now, but he was at Case Western Reserve for quite a while, heading up a family business division. I don't know what they would call it. Program, probably. And so we read his book and realized that he's in Cleveland. And after reading it cover to cover and all these notes, we called him. He's like, typical Cleveland response. Of course, I'll meet with you, right? So he came out and he met with us, and we talked through, and how do you help a family business that is in this situation? And because my uncle loved to learn, he was very open to taking a course at Case about how do you keep a family business in the family over generations, and how do you help with succession. And so many family businesses, one of the most important things I got out of that is we all think we're unique, and we are the most screwed up family on the planet. Like, I think every family that's in a multi-generational family business thinks there's nobody could be as messed up as we are. Now, granted, there wasn't some of the Netflix shows back in the day, so that, now you just watch one of those shows, you're like, yeah, clearly we're not in a bad shape as they are. But we didn't have that at the time. So that's what allowed us to stay a family business. And because I now realized I was really passionate about it, and the timing was happening right about the same time that I was working myself out of a job at the Ritz. And my father with his brother Frank, had developed the next generation of Vitamix that, and that's a whole story in itself, but this next generation of Vitamix would allow us to sell, to create 220-volt versions and 100-volt versions for Japan, and be able to sell it around the world. And they needed somebody who would create a division where we could sell internationally. So here I'm thinking my background in hospitality, but what I loved about hospitality was creating that experience and engaging people and bringing out the emotional connection to experiences. And I thought, why can't you do that in the manufacturing world? So the whole exposure to this really strong culture about the emotional connection to things, I didn't realize at the time that I was also passionate about that. So I brought my hospitality and my quality focus, and now I loved Cultures International and this, like, the impact and the power that culture can have. And I kind of pack that up in your being, because it's part of who I am. And I came back to Vitamix and to head up our international division, which at the time I think we were under $1 million in sales outside the United States. And, we grew it pretty significantly, because it's a big wide world out there.
Yes. The spirit of all of that reminds me of a quote I came across, I believe from your grandfather in preparation for this, but that he had relayed to you that was something to the effect of, someday you'll understand that we're not here to sell machines. We're here to change people's lives. And that won't happen unless people know how to use the Vitamix, something to that extent. But it feels very much in the spirit of your framing, of that.
So that actually was my grandfather talking to me.
Yeah.
Because when I was 12 and we came to one of these family reunions, we had grown out of the little log cabin that my grandfather built. So, and they had just put an expansion on the Vitamix building. So we were holding our family reunion in the Vitamix building. And in the middle of this get together, and we're doing skits. I mean, that's how you keep 30 some kids happy, right? As you say, go design a skit. We'll watch you. You can entertain us. So we were doing skits and the phone rang, and my grandfather had set it up. So when the customer service phone rang, it would ring throughout the entire building. And he gets up and leaves the family reunion to go into his office to answer the phone. Well, I'm a tween. I'm, there's one thing that's consistent across all the generations. You're brats at that age, right? You're selfish. And I'm thinking it's all about me. And I came from out of town, and how could my grandfather leave our family reunion? So I actually go into his office and sit down and give him the, I wouldn't call it the death stare, but maybe that, like, what are you doing? Come on back and be with the family. And he's describing to this lady how to use her Vitamix machine. And in fact, he's teaching her how to make bread. And if you haven't made bread in your Vitamix yet,
no, I haven't.
You can grind the grain from the wheat berries, and then you can add the ingredients in. You can actually knead it in the container, and it bounces up in a ball, and drop it into a pan and let it rise, and you can make bread. People don't make bread as often as they used to, and our blades have become more general and focused on processing liquids than bouncing of the bread. So we had created after that, at some point, a blade that was perfect for the grinding of the grain and the bouncing of the bread dough. But in order to do that, he says, no, it's okay. Let's start over. I want you to put the wheat berries in your container, and no, it's okay. I'll stay in the line. I want you to run it for about a minute. And I'm sitting there, I'm just seething at this point. And then he says, now I want you to knead it. No, it's okay. I'll stay on the line. And each step, no, it's okay. I'll stay on the line with you, until she had this beautiful loaf of bread, and it was ready to rise. And then my grandfather gets off the phone. And I remember my grandfather always being this happy-go-lucky, jovial, smiling guy, especially when his grandkids were around, right? Well, at that moment, I got a very different look. And that's when he looked at me and he said, Jodi, he said, someday, I think he was almost pleading with me, but someday you will understand that this isn't about selling machines. This is about changing people's lives. This is about helping them know that they can do something and be successful at something. And we're not successful until every single person that buys a Vitamix machine is successful. And you're right. I never forgot that. So I kind of brought that back with me too. It's all these little pieces that become a part of who you are.
Did you come to understand?
Oh, I did. I absolutely did. In fact, I think it's one of the pieces that helped me instill such a passion for hospitality, because even hospitality management in the Ritz-Carlton Ritz-Carlton's not successful until every guest and every employee has an emotional, you can instill that well-being in them. So I think that for me, whether it resonated with me because it was already a part of who I am, or whether that particular moment of the fact that it came from my grandfather, the one who's usually jovial and smiling and happy, in a way where he was serious. And so I don't know if that triggered the emotional connection, but it absolutely became critical to my understanding of who I am and how I ran the company.
Yeah. You mentioned 1921 as the founding. So we are now beyond the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the organization, which really is an incredible milestone for any business, let alone a family owned one. To your point about, the tensions that arise over generations and particularly, a fourth generation organization. And above and beyond all that, it really isn't survival. that is that amazing. It's that Vitamix is such a renowned brand with a cult following and this incredibly passionate base of users. So when you reflect on the founding, the history, the evolution of the company, how do you think about why Vitamix has been able to thrive over such a long time horizon when so many other companies don't even survive?
Mm. So a lot of companies don't survive for lots of different reasons, right? There's a lot of family companies that the reason that they create the company is because they fully intend to sell it. They don't necessarily intend
Yeah.
to keep it. So how Vitamix started, my great grandfather had was married, and he had I think he had two sons at the time, and my grandfather and his brother. And it was during 1918, which was a pandemic. It was a Spanish flu pandemic, and my great grandmother and the third child passed due to this in the middle of this pandemic. So my great grandfather found himself trying to raise their two other sons in a world where it was very difficult for. I mean, it's still difficult, but for a single parent. But it was incredibly difficult back then for a single parent who was a dad, right? So he's trying to raise his two sons, and then he was doing this job and that job in order to make that happen. In 1921, it was a great. It was not the Great Depression. It was a depression precursor of the Great Depression. And in that 1921, end of 2021, he lost 1920. What am I saying? Back in 1920 and 1921, when we had the Depression, that he lost everything else financially. And it wasn't until my grandmother was a prolific writer, and I guess this is relatively common. We're so blessed that she chose to do it. But every single letter that she wrote, she had carbon paper underneath it, and she kept copies of every single letter that she wrote, and then she kept copies of the letters that she got from other family members. So when we finally got to a point where we're like 85 years old as a company, we wanted to dig into this history. We came across a letter where my grandmother referenced the fact that her father-in-law almost committed suicide, and how grateful she was that he chose not to commit suicide and stick it out, because if he hadn't done that, Vitamix wouldn't have been founded and we wouldn't be where we are today. So my great grandfather starts the company, and he's selling it. He comes across a product we call it the can opener, right? Like it's a common day thing.
Yeah.
The canned goods were coming after the war, and people were opening them with knives. I mean, just picture, hey son, can you open us a can of peas? And he takes out a pocket knife and he's jabbing the lid and peeling it off, and people were getting hurt and contamination. It was not a good thing. So the reason for the can opener was to keep people safe and to help them eat healthier. We don't think of a can opener for those reasons today, but back in the day, that's why that was a particular product that my great grandfather got excited about. So then he went down this path of health and food very early on in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, right? There was this focus on what products could we bring to help people eat healthy foods and make it enjoyable and easier to do. In fact, at one point, the company was called the Natural Foods Institute, because he was doing research on whole food health. So that was part of our path. My grandfather joins him, and the two of them are running the company together. His brothers chose not to. I think the early on would, but eventually they stepped out. So it was really just my grandfather and his son. And so that's a really easy succession, if you will, when you both be on it together for a very long time, and then one moves out and the other steps in. And then by that time, his kids, my grandfather was raising his kids, and they all got involved. And I believe the reason it stayed in the company is just the family members across generations we have shared values similar to communities that we're from, or areas that we're from, or cultures, right? There's things that tie us together. And one of the things that ties the majority of the Barnard family, which is hundreds of people at this point, is our understanding of life and the role that food plays in our bodies and what we eat. Does that mean we're all the healthiest people on the planet? No, it doesn't mean that. But it means we get it, we appreciate it. And by the time the third generation was running the company, there was this very deep ingrained appreciation for uh, what our in our generation what our great grandfather had done, and the legacy is also something that we all feel very passionate about. So that's why our particular company almost fought and continues to fight to say, how do we continue to make this a successful family owned business? And at the end of the day, it's not about the money that we can make by selling it. It's about the difference that we can make by keeping the family. There's a fear that if we were to sell the company, that somebody would come in and say, "Oh, you don't need to add all this expense in how you create your blade assembly, and you don't have to have this expense in the motors that you select, and pay this so much attention to how everything works together." It would seem like it wasn't necessary, but you start to pick away at those fundamental things that we've discovered over the years, and the product quality would go down pretty quickly, and it wouldn't be the Vitamix as we know it today.
Yeah. When you came to lead the organization, and we can talk about the international expansion, but I'm curious how you thought about balancing that sense of stewarding the legacy that you just mentioned with making bold strategic decisions that altered the trajectory of the company in the way that they did, that allowed for it to grow as much as it has over the last decades.
Yeah, that is such a great question, because there's so much to unpack, right?
Yeah.
And how do you keep the legacy alive, and how do you become strategic in how you develop and grow things. So when I came back to Vitamix, I to head up our international division, and I was doing international for both our commercial. We had a commercial division and a household division. Vitamix was actually started in the household side of things. A lot of people think because our quality is so fantastic, clearly we're a commercial product that ventured into the household side. But we actually were in the household side, and we had so many chefs that were begging us to create a commercial version that we finally created one in the 1980s. So we haven't been in commercial as long as we've been in household. But at this point, the products that we could sell overseas, we are selling them to both. And so my initial job was to go out and set up distributors around the world. And I met some of the most amazing family companies that were distributors on both consumer products and food service products in these different countries. So where there's a handful of them in the States that might still be family owned, internationally, the majority of them are. And it didn't take me long to realize that the fact that we were a family business resonated so significantly with them. But it also helped us cross the cultural divide, if you will, of I understood at a deeper level what they were going through in building up their businesses, and what that took. So we understood the dynamics of it. So I was so unbelievably proud of my great grandfather and my grandparents and my dad and aunts and uncles and everyone that had been involved in it, and recognizing the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it. That I was driven to keep it in the family. Like there was never, it never crossed my mind, should we at this point go out of the family? My brother and I fought to help keep it in the family at this point, right? So I'm walking into it through a lens of how do we, it's not a question about whether we should stay a family business. It's
Yeah.
a question of how. And being a family business was such an integral part of our history and who we were, that let's figure out how to use that as a strategic advantage. So how part of the way we kept the legacy is understanding the value of that legacy to who we are. when you go back and you realize that your great grandfather insisted on quality, and he insisted that the products that we sell are focused on food, and preferably products that people would use to eat healthier. Now, people don't use all of our products to eat healthy, and that's okay. It's still about food, right? And oftentimes they may not be eating everything healthy, but they might be getting more whole foods in. So knowing that you are a steward of 4 generations, you're the 4th generation, so you're the steward of 3 generations before you of creating something. There's no other opportunity to do that. Like, I could not in my lifetime I might be able to create a 2nd generation business. And maybe I could be around to see a 2nd generation turn into a 3rd generation business. But it's not possible in our lifetime to create a 4th generation business. So what an incredible, incredible opportunity for somebody to say, will you steward this and make your great grandparents and your grandparents and your aunts and your uncles and your dad proud of for what this can become. So that's where the legacy for us was really deep and important. The legacy, though, is what drove our growth, because when I dug in and realized that my great grandfather back in 1921, when he started the company, wanted to sell products that would help people eat healthier and enjoy whole foods, thinking, wow, like that's what he wants us to do. He doesn't want us to be big for the sake of being big. He doesn't want us to grow for the sake of growth. But that was what was important to him, and is what important to the generations since then. So you take that piece, and then you take what's happening at that particular point in time. So I came back to Vitamix in 1997. I head up our international division, got that going, and then in 2020, what was it? It would have been 2002. I was asked to head up the household division, and then in 2004, the commercial division. And it was right about that time, I've already expressed one of my more nerdy moments of interacting with people, but I've always been a little nerdy in that regards. And I found myself in conversations with people. If it got quiet, I was always doing research. So I would eventually bring the conversation around and say, so what'd you have for breakfast? And why did you have that for breakfast? And what foods do you like to eat? And why do you eat those foods? And why don't you eat this food? And so I found myself awkwardly trying to do research and just, maybe it's a Midwest thing, but people were very accommodating, right? They would they'd tell me exactly. And then they'd say, well, I don't like to eat meat. And I'd say, oh, why do you make that choice? And up until about 2003, 2004, the answer that I got 99.9% of the time to that question was to protect the animals. These poor animals, the processing, what they have to go through. We're gonna save the animals. And then in around 2003, 2004, I'd asked the question, and people started saying, because I feel better, because it's healthier for me, because I have more energy. The answer started to change. And I, being the nerdy one that I was, and laser focused on what we were doing and our purpose as a company, I took note of this, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And the other thing that was happening is the internet was growing. It had been around for a while at that point, but there wasn't a lot of e-commerce going on. And so e-commerce was developing. The other thing that was happening is the way people communicate and develop their social groups was changing in the early 2000s. So prior to that, your closest friends would have been people that you work with in your community, your neighborhood. By community, it might be your church community or your local communities, whatever organization you're involved in, but it was usually relatively local. And it didn't easily spread outside that. So early 2000s, picture this: you've got people that are interested in whole food health, and now instead of just being a part of a garden club or local communities, they are talking to people in Europe about whole food health, and in Taiwan and Australia. And now my community is a global community, and I'm learning so much more about this thing that I'm interested in. So we took note of the fact that the whole dynamics of social interaction were changing. And then the other thing that was changing is in light of, or in connection with, people eating differently because it was good for them.
Yeah.
Development was happening with, you heard things like chia seeds. I have to tell you, the first time people heard chia seeds, they're like, wait, what? It's different things that were kale and all these things that were not necessarily something that we thought of. People were recognizing the value of these different foods. And it's really difficult to sit there and eat a bunch of chia seeds, and it's not even necessarily that helpful if you just nosh on them, right? So you have to kind of break them down, and kale became popular once you were able to put it in smoothies. But until then, it wasn't really all that popular. So all these dynamics are changing at the same time. And I love puzzles, and I like to see patterns about coming together. So I saw all of these different, they looked somewhat disparate, but I saw this pattern emerging that we may have an opportunity to do the very thing that my great grandfather wanted us to do now more than ever. Like, we may be able to connect people through food and help them think about food differently because of the social connections changing, because of the vocabulary changing. The other thing that's changing is it was one of the first times, and this way before your time, but you used to go to the doctor, and whatever the doctor said, that's what you did. Like, you never questioned it, right? Now you go to the doctor and you say, ask a lot of questions. What about this? What are my other options? How about this? Can I do this? People were owning their health and not making the assumption that I am going to follow the same path as my parents and my grandparents. So if they had heart disease, I'm going to have heart disease, and I'm just going to die. That's the way it happens. Like, if they had cancer, then I'm clearly going to get cancer, and I'm going to die eventually from that. And this was people owning it to say, wait, I can change the trajectory of my life, how I'm valuing my life today, how I'm experiencing my life today, and my long-term health by choices that I make, and they're not all medical choices. That's another thing that's happening at the same time. So then you have another element in Whole Foods. It's a grocery store. We've been saying Whole Foods for decades and decades and decades. Yeah. So this grocery store is named Whole Foods, and all of a sudden it starts to expand across the U.S. And this word Whole Foods is now a common word. You've got this trend, which has probably been here your entire life, but the smoothie trend, right? That's starting in California with the Jamba juices, and
yep.
They wanted to grow, because the other thing that's been happening in the U.S. is the development of chains, right? And chains expanding across the U.S. Well, the smoothie chains were having the smoothie concepts were having a hard time expanding, because the equipment that they were using, which was the most important and most expensive piece of equipment in order for their concept to work, wasn't performing, and it wasn't performing consistently, and it wasn't lasting, and they constantly had to replace it, and they had inconsistent quality until you insert the Vitamix. And the Vitamix is meant to perform consistently and take everything down, and even commercially it just outperforms anything else that's out there. So all these things are happening, and I'm thinking, wow, we're a very small company at the time. How do we create a momentum out of all this?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Horton and the Who? I digress.
I'm not.
Okay, so there's this storybook in my generation called The Horton and the Who, and the concept is this little elephant hears, because elephants have good hearing. He picks up a speck of dust, and he hears inside this speck of dust an entire village of people, but nobody else hears it. So in his forest, all the other animals think he's crazy. Now, poor elephant, he's got he's hearing things, he's losing it, and they, typical, more of not American culture, but a human culture, they want to separate him from his speck of dust.
Yeah.
because clearly the speck of dust is making him crazy. He doesn't want to be separated because he knows that what they're going to do is destroy the speck of dust, and he can tell that there's an entire village inside the speck of dust. So as the story progresses, Horton convinces the village of to all at the same time take every single magnifying mechanism that they can come up with their voices, and build magnifiers, and all shout at exactly the same time. And when they do that, it breaks open the barrier, and it's loud enough that all of a sudden everyone else can hear what Horton has been hearing all along, and recognize that there's an entire village inside this little speck of dust. So you take that concept, and here I am, a very simple-minded person, right? I've never had any desire to run a company. The only reason I did is because I so wanted to change the way people felt about food, that if running it is what I had to do to make that happen, then so be it. But I had this Horton and the Who in my mind, and I'm realizing we have this opportunity to really break. First, it was just break open the windows of way people think about food and health, if we could just bring all these different voices together. So what if we brought the people that were all focused on whole food health? So all the organizations, all of the smoothie chains, all of the companies that are promoting the new health and wellness, if we could bring all of them together and give them megaphones to speak through. And how did we do that as a manufacturer of a blending product? Was to help them understand how the Vitamix was like the missing puzzle piece to making what they were doing consistently delicious and easy, and therefore they could be more successful. So that my only plan was, how do we bring them all together, and how do we create these voices so that we can change the way people think about food? It ended up being so successful that at first we were, let's break the windows down. It's like, no, let's break the doors off. Let's blow the whole wall out. Let's literally change the way people think about food forever. And that was our plan. And the only way it was possible was through incorporating this culture that I learned from the Ritz-Carlton, which is every single person matters, and what they bring to a table is important. And we didn't even start talking about purpose yet, but understanding what drives you as a person, and what your individual purpose is. And if your purpose that drives you can be by you living your purpose every day, you are accomplishing something that's going to drive our company purpose forward. We have a win-win, right? And just to illustrate, we had a gentleman who was our director of communications. He loved history, and his passion and purpose in life was, how do I take history and make it relevant and bring it to life? Okay, he did it every single day when he worked at Vitamix. And you people that on our production line, that when they realized that maybe it was their hands that made a difference. I was reading testimonials to our operations team one day, and this testimonial that I was reading was about a mom whose daughter she just didn't have a lot of energy. She couldn't digest food, so she was on a feeding tube, and she was laying listlessly on a couch, and the feeding tube, it was sustaining her, it was keeping her alive, but it wasn't giving her much life. So she bought her Vitamix, and the whole food that she put in her Vitamix, she sent us a picture, and this daughter was running, and her eyes were sparkling, and her hair was glowing. And I mean, she was a child again, right? So this is what the testimonial was about. And Carmen, who was working on our production floor, I noticed that she just had tears. She was trying to be discreet, but just tears were pouring down her face. So afterwards, I went up and I just gave her a big hug, and I asked her if she was okay. And she said, "Oh," she goes, "Yeah, I'm better than okay." She said, "At that moment, I realized that these two hands might have built that machine that brought life to the little girl. And I'll never make another Vitamix machine without thinking about the fact that I could literally be changing somebody's life. So it's no longer about just putting the parts together and sending it down the line. It's about building something that changes lives. What I did, got that from, I know I'm going through this really quickly, but I got that understanding from the Ritz-Carlton and also from a life and death experience that I went through personally. And I made it a point to say, what if as a leader, I could help every single person that was involved, whether they're an employee or a distributor or a customer, what if my purpose was to help them discover their wings inside themselves and help them fly? Like that became my, it still is in a lot of ways, my purpose is to help people find their wings, give them a chance to fly. What if I did that for everyone in this community? Therefore, they found their purpose and aligned their purpose, what we were trying to do. And that was how it exploded as fast as it did. It wasn't me. It was just me helping give permission to and helping people discover things in themselves and aligning it to what needed to get done, and then getting out of the way and getting the obstacles out of the way and letting them do what needed to be done.
Wow. That's awesome.
I kind of went through things fast, but there's like one of the things I would love.
There's so many threads I want to pull on.
One of the things I would love to talk to people when they realize Cleveland is the company didn't start in Cleveland. It started in Illinois. And it was my grandfather my grandfather came and brought Vitamix to the Great Lakes Exposition in 1935 and 36, 37. I don't know, right in that time frame. And it was either 2 summers long or a whole year long, but they fell in love with the people of Cleveland. And they picked their company up and they moved it for Cleveland because of the people. And
wow.
I believe in my heart, one of the reasons that Vitamix became iconic the way it did, it was truly about the unbelievable people that are in Northeast Ohio and joined us in Northeast Ohio because they felt comfortable and joined Vitamix in our mission, if you will, to change the way the world thinks about food. We couldn't have done it any other way. That unpacking that alone, I think is something a lot of people experience about Cleveland, but they don't necessarily realize the how powerful that actually is.
Yeah. Well, and I certainly don't think most people are aware of that in the context of Vitamix, in the history.
Yeah, bringing it together, right? Creating that culture and the whole purpose element of how powerful purpose and understanding what our purpose is another thing to unpack.
In light of all that framing of legacy, I'm curious if you could, in a hypothetical, talk to your great-grandfather about the current state of the organization and where it is and how it's evolved. What do you think would surprise him or excite him most about its evolution?
So my great-grandfather, apparently I met him when I was very, very little, but I don't remember meeting him.
Yeah.
What we do have, though, and what so many people, I'm so blessed to know that we have this, is we have an infomercial that he filmed when in 1949, I think it was 1949. In fact, if you go online, you can still look up Vitamix infomercial or Papa Barnard, which everyone calls it.
Yeah.
Right,
Papa Barnard.
It's a half hour long, and it is absolutely hysterical. But most people don't have that legacy of their grandparents. Right now you probably do, but in my generation, we didn't. Most people, great grandparents didn't do infomercials, and they weren't on video, things like that. So
right. I mean, that had to have been one of the first infomercials. I don't know.
It was the first infomercial. He created
1949. That was the first
genre of infomercials.
Oh
my
goodness!
How that happens is a whole nother fun story. So so I digress, but I'll tell you the story. So my this newfangled thing was coming out called a television, and my grandfather goes to his dad and says, "Dad, you have got to take your demonstration, and because the goal is to get the demonstration in with a message in front of as many people as possible. Right? That's how they sell Vitamix machines. because more people understand why they would need one. So he says, you have to get this in front of a lot of people. You should do it on this thing called the television. Apparently, my great-grandfather said, are you kidding? This is just a fad. It's going to tear the fiber, everything you hear, it's going to tear apart the fibers of the family. It's going to be out in the curb. Like there's no history with this, or there's no future with this television thing. So this battle went back and forth. And finally, my great-grandfather was convinced that, okay, fine, I'll do it once. So Cleveland, Ohio, one of the 12 places in the US that actually had a television station. My great-grandfather goes downtown. Now, back in the day, they didn't have credit cards. You didn't do a lot of checks, right? You dealt with cash. So he walks in with wads of cash in his pocket because he knew it was going to be expensive. And he says, who's in charge here? And I would like to buy a half hour of your TV time or whatever it is that you call this. And he says, well, sir, I mean, we can certainly do that, but we have to build you a set. And he looked around the room as the story goes and said, that's a kitchen set over there. Can I use that? And he said, yes, you can use that. Fine. I said, well, then you're going to have to do some rehearsal. No, I do this day in and day out. I know exactly what I'm going to say. Fine. Well, we want to film it because then we're going to edit it. He said, I don't want you to edit it. I just want to talk to people. I don't want it to sound fake. I just want it to be real and authentic. So they said, fine. We have a slot, and I believe it was on Saturday night, and I believe that it aired in places like New York City, so we may be the first Saturday Night Live, but we don't get credit. But so he takes this half hour that he has, and he just does his demonstration that he's always done, and it's completely inappropriate today because he blames mom for everything and degrading. Nobody has any teeth because of what mom fed them, and so it's funny if you put it in the context of when it was created, right? It's inappropriate today. But he went and he did this show for half hour. What made it an infomercial is halfway through, he says, if you'd like to buy a Vitamix, please call this number. And he gave them my grandfather's home phone number. And so all night long, until about 1 or 2 in the morning, my grandfather's taking calls in the house, sitting on the edge of the bed. And back then, the operator is the one that connects all the calls, right? So she's connecting all the calls, and he's scrambling, and he's writing. He's probably begging my grandmother for little pieces of paper. You did everything COD. You didn't take money over the phone back then. You just send it and you got paid. So he's writing these addresses and sold over 400 of them that night.
Oh, my God.
Normally more than what we'd sell in an entire year. And finally, at sometime in the middle of the night, the operator comes on and says, Mr. Barnard, I'm sorry, but I'm going home. We're not going to get any more calls today. And that was the only reason the phone stopped ringing, is because the operator had to go home. But that was the first ever infomercial.
What an amazing story. I mean, it's kind of fascinating to me to think about that in the context of social media and advertising today, and how it actually comes full circle in a lot of ways. I feel like the most powerful advertisements today are those that are the authentic long form YouTube infomercials, but no one calls them that anymore.
Right.
Wow. That's amazing.
So it started the whole genre of infomercials back in 1949. Now, the one that you're going to see, so the first couple times he did it, they didn't record it. He literally just did it live. And for a couple of months in 1940. And then in 1950, they said, we should really record this. So the one that's on YouTube is the one that was done in 1950, not the original ones, because he literally said, no, don't record it. I'll just do it live. So,
wow.
Yeah, really, really neat experience. So I know we have to close because I have to jump on another call. In a couple
Yes.
But thank you for this. It was a lot of fun chatting.
Oh, yeah. I feel like we're just getting started. To that end, we were just getting started. As a reminder, part 2 of this conversation will drop next week, and I encourage everyone to listen in for lots more wisdom and stories from Jodi. Thank you. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, so if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternjefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.